Sony just released a new compact camera called the Sony ZV1, and they let me borrow it. So I figured I would try to do a complete walkthrough on it for you guys. Now, if you're not familiar, a complete walkthrough on this channel is where I try to go through every single feature I possibly can on a new device so that you guys are better prepared should you be in the market to actually go buy one. Now, because this is a camera walkthrough, I'm going to try to film everything on that camera. So all of these shots that you see and the audio that you're hearing is coming from that camera with its built-in mics, except for when you see shots of the camera itself, because obviously that would be very difficult to do. Now, with that said, there's a lot to go through. So let's get started with the hardware. This is the Sony ZV1. And it's not just a new camera for Sony, it's apparently the beginning of a new lineup of cameras going forward. Now, the first thing you'll notice about it is it's tiny, and it's super light at just 294 grams, and so it easily fits in your pocket. The very next thing you'll undoubtedly notice, which was teased in their silhouetted image that Sony posted to social not too long ago, is that Sony finally put a fully articulating flip-out screen on it. Now, if you're not familiar, the reason everybody has been bugging Sony to put a flip-out screen on their cameras, and some have even gone to great lengths with third-party accessories to try to even get something that even mimics that on other Sony cameras, is because it just makes filming yourself a lot easier, especially for the larger and larger demographic of people who are filming by themselves for either social media or, say, YouTube. And honestly, that concept of filming yourself for the internet sort of sets the tone for this camera. I'll explain more as we go. That monitor is bright enough to be seen outdoors as well, which is great. And if you close it with the screen facing in, it'll automatically turn off the camera, while opening it back up will automatically turn it back on, which is handy for getting quick shots, frankly. Moving around to the top of the camera, we have an on-off button that I never use thanks to that screen trick I just mentioned, a mode button that allows you to cycle through all of the camera modes from your different priority photo modes to movie modes, your saved memory presets, etc. Next to that is a shutter button and a toggle to zoom in and out using the built-in 28 to 70mm f1.8 to 2.8 lens. And we also have a particularly large dedicated video recording button, again, emphasizing the video-centric nature of this camera. Also, next to that, we have a button that hasn't been on a Sony camera before, a defocus mode button that can also be used as a customizable C1 button. Now, when Sony first told me they had a defocus mode on this camera, my mind immediately went to the video bokeh and video portrait mode that you see on smartphones that uses software to blur out the foreground from the background, and is just a terrible implementation overall. Thankfully, this is not that. Instead, defocus mode is sort of like aperture priority mode, but on steroids. In aperture priority mode, the aperture is what you control, and the camera then adjusts the shutter speed and ISO on its own based on whatever you set the aperture to. This mode is generally used to try and get shallower depth of field shots by setting that aperture as low or fast as possible, creating more separation between the subject and background. Defocus mode now, though, essentially does the same thing, except it automatically sets the aperture as wide as possible, and then does some other algorithmic magic to set everything else to give you the most blur possible behind your subject. And then it also can adjust this in real time to keep the exposure on the subject as even as possible, even as lighting conditions change. You can also turn it on and off in the middle of recording if you wanted to. Something else that can help with this look, and was unexpected to see on this camera, is a built-in ND filter that you can turn on and off in the settings to help with filming outside in very bright environments, while still letting you keep the aperture as wide open as possible. The next thing that we need to talk about, and that's on top of this camera, is the new onboard mic that is a 3-capsule forward directional microphone, which, so long as you are in front of the camera, since they face forward, sound like this, as again, all the audio you've heard so far, and for the remainder of this video, unless otherwise mentioned, is going to be recorded using them. Now, there is no auto gain feature on this mic like there is on the Sony ECM B1M mic that I normally use when running and gunning with the A7 III. But here on the ZV1, it does seem to at least have a built-in limiter to stop you from topping out. You can set the mic gain level manually in the settings as well, and it also has built-in noise cancellation, which is kind of cool. Speaking of accessories, the Sony ZV1 also has that same multi-interface shoe on top that the A7 III does, so you can add multi-interface accessories to this camera as well. That shoe can also hold the custom windscreen that is included with the camera. Okay, and here's a quick test of the windscreen on top. As you can tell, it's windy. I have the windscreen on, and this is what that sounds like. And now, same wind, but no No dead cat anymore. So here's what that sounds like. On the right side of the camera, we have a 3.5mm mic port so that you can use other mics that aren't just multi-interface ones. We have a micro USB port that Sony calls their multi-port. They seem to like the word multi. And a mini HDMI port. It's worth mentioning, I think, that while I was able to use a capture card and plug the camera in via that HDMI port to my computer to then be able to live stream with it, Sony has mentioned that they will release PC software that will allow you to stream directly from the USB port on the camera to your computer without the need for a capture card. Now, no date was given for the release of that software other than, quote, within the first few months after the product is announced, end quote. On the front, we have something that would help with that live streaming, but is also super useful for when filming yourself. Again, there's a theme here. It's a tally light. This turns on whenever you are recording, and as someone who has used cameras with and without this feature, it's a nice to have, honestly, as there have definitely been times when I thought I was recording myself, and then it turns out I wasn't, and have to shoot the scene all over again. On the back, we have our menu button for going into the albeit intimidating Sony menu system, especially for anyone that I think this camera is actually aimed for. But thanks to the pretty decent software on here, which we'll get to in a sec, you won't need to go into this too much, and you can also make a custom menu at the end of the list to get to the few things that you might need quicker access to at least. Back here, we also have our function button. That is another reason why you won't have to go into that full menu as much, as it brings up a lot of the things that you do need quicker access for at the bottom of the screen. And you can then use the D-pad wheel and the center button to navigate all of this. Under that, we have our playback button to review photos and videos, and we have our delete button that can also double as another customizable button, C2. Finally, at the bottom, we have our standard mount point and a battery door that houses the NP-BX1 Sony battery inside, as well as our SD card slot. Now that battery is rated to 130 to 200 minutes of video recording, and that seems about right to me, if just being probably closer to the lower end of that. Regardless, the batteries are tiny enough to carry multiple, even in your normal pockets, and you can also use USB battery packs and plug them in via the micro USB port to charge the camera on the go as well. Okay, so now besides the fact that everything you're seeing that doesn't include the camera itself in the shot is being shot on here, let's go through some of the shooting capabilities of it and some of the software that Sony has added that I think is kind of interesting. The camera shoots up to 100 megabit per second bit rate in either 4K up to 30 frames per second or 1080p at up to 120 frames per second, which you can then of course slow down. The camera also has a pretty aggressive stabilization system in the form of OIS, optically stabilized, plus EIS, electronically stabilized. And you can switch between these in that function menu and go from none to standard to active. The latter of which crops the sensor slightly to be able to use software to further stabilize the image, and while it can be a little jerky at times, if you are more deliberate with your movements, it's actually pretty good. Now beyond that, we also have some serious autofocus in here in the form of eye autofocus and face detection autofocus for human subjects, but also real-time tracking that you can tap on an object to have it keep focus on it as best as it can. And it's surprisingly good, honestly, and that's good, because if you want to shoot with manual focus, there is no focus ring on the lens, and you have to use the wheel on the back, which, even with focus peaking that the camera can do, is something you really just don't want to do unless you absolutely have to, as it's much slower and less intuitive than the use of that lens ring would be. Speaking of autofocus, and again, further indicating the demographic I mentioned for this camera of internet video creators, Sony added in a feature called Product Showcase that once turned on will be more forgiving of not locking on your face if you put an object up in front of your face, something that beauty creators trying to show products they're discussing seem to struggle with. Speaking again of people who are filming themselves, there is also a face priority auto exposure function in here now that again uses some clever algorithms to try and keep the exposure of a person's face constant. This means that if you're filming yourself walking and go from one lighting condition to another, it'll make sure that your face stays correctly exposed. It's kind of clever. We also can shoot in HLG, S-Log 2 and 3, have interval shooting for time lapses, and have a super slow motion option that is called high frame rate in the camera that lets you shoot for brief periods in up to 960 frames per second, and it'll automatically slow it down for you to whatever frame rate you select in the camera. It does, however, take a bit of time to do the processing. It's not just a video camera, of course, it can also take stills.
Now, finally, this camera costs $799, and for about a month, they're doing an introductory price of $749. And as usual, I'll link to the cheapest price I can find on it, as well as more information at the link below. They are also releasing a vlogger accessory kit that comes with a tripod hand grip that can connect to the camera via Bluetooth, and also a 64 gig SD card for $149, and it'll also get the extra $50 off price for the same limited amount of time.
There you go, guys. Quick walkthrough on the new ZV1. Let me know what you guys think of the camera of this video in the comments below. Always appreciate hearing from you guys. And if you like this video, please thumbs up it or share it. It's greatly appreciated. Also, check out the rest of the channel. If you like what you see there, please subscribe and ding the bell next door to subscribe so you get notified when I do new videos. Also, there's a link below to sign up for my email newsletter. It goes out once a week. It has all the videos I do here on YouTube, as well as other stuff that I put on the website doesn't necessarily make it here to video. As always, though, regardless, thanks for watching.